So what the purpose of this tutorial is going to be is to introduce data visualization techniques in After Effects using expression language. And then these animations can be used either as standalone videos or they can be integrated into PowerPoint presentations as an animated GIF. So what I'll be teaching is just a basic intro of the After Effects interface. If you've never used the program before, I'll kind of get you introduced to that. Of course, you can learn more about it through online tutorials or other DMC lessons. I'll also be demonstrating how to organize and import your data into After Effects. And then I'll be walking through the process of setting up a simple bar chart using expression language. Now, you can make lots of different kinds of charts, from pie charts to line graphs, to basically anything else within After Effects. I'll be hopefully teaching you more of the thought process behind it so that as you encounter these different types of graphs, if you want to make them, you'll have the tools necessary. So first, let's look at what we're trying to make here. This is the demo I've made. You'll see a bar chart that animates over time. This is showing the different items borrowed, lent out by the DMC from 2014 to 2017. All right. So with that, it's always good to have an image of what you're trying to make before you start going in. With that in mind as the goal, let's hop into After Effects here. This is the opening layout. When you open it for the first time, you might see it in this default mode. This isn't standard, so we're going to go over to the standard mode, which I think is just easier to use. So we're going to go ahead and hit New Composition. I'm going to create a 1920 by 1080p HD composition and import it right there. All right, so After Effects, just a little bit about it. It's a program that can be used for visual effects and motion graphics. So what we'll be dealing with here is mainly the motion graphics side that has to do with shapes and motion and animation and that sort of thing. So this first part of the lesson is it's going to be introducing you to the basics of shapes and motion. If you come up to the top here, you'll see the toolbar where you have all your tools. If you select the rectangle tool, we can draw a rectangle. So again, this is going to show you how this works. If you click and drag, you'll make a rectangle. I'll release, and there we go. Now I want to select that rectangle, so I'll go up here to the Select tool. Of course, there are lots of keyboard shortcuts over time you'll learn to use, hopefully. Selection tool is probably the first one you should get to know, get comfortable with, and that is just hitting V. That's one you're going to be using a lot today. So now if you select V, you can move this rectangle around. So what we want, if we come down here, we can see the rectangle in the layer. And right now, if we go along the timeline here and we scrub forward in time, we see it's not moving, and we want it to move. So we're going to go to the properties of this rectangle, into Transform, and we can adjust its position. If you click this stopwatch, it's going to make this little keyframe right here. And if we move forward in time, say 1 second, and you can come up here and move the rectangle, you'll see that there's this line here, and that means that it's going to be moving. Look at that. All right, so that's the normal way to make motion in After Effects, is to use keyframes like that. And you could hypothetically do this with bar charts. It would be very tedious, though, and that's not what we're going to do. So if you hit the stopwatch again, you'll get rid of those keyframes. We're not using them today. We're going to be having data-driven animations, not keyframe-driven animations. So just as an introduction to what expression language is and how we make data-driven animation, I'll show you. If instead of just clicking the stopwatch, if you hold down Alt and then click the stopwatch, you'll have this, which opens the expression language window or interface. So expression language in After Effects is basically just JavaScript that can be used to create procedurally created animations. So let me just give you an example. So instead of just moving this rectangle around on the screen, we can input a number here. So if we put open bracket 960, comma 540, close bracket, we have a coordinate here, which is the center of the screen. That's nice. Now, what if we want it to move horizontally across the screen? Well, we're going to affect the x-coordinate. So as an example, if we hit time times, let's say 500, you'll see you have this animation now. And what it's doing is it's taking the current time, so in this case, 1 second, multiplying it by 500, and inputting it as the x-coordinate of position. And so this is just an example of how you can use expressions to create animations that you could also make with standard keyframes. All right, so with that kind of introduction to After Effects out of the way, we can delete our trusty rectangle and get on with actually making our bar chart. The first thing we want to do is make a white background instead of the black background here. So I'm going to right-click in this area here, select New, Solid. And we're going to make sure, we can click this to make sure it's the composition size, make sure it is white, OK, and click OK. That's great. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click the lock button right here. All this means is now I can't select it on the screen, which is good because I don't want to be accidentally selecting this throughout this process. The next thing we want to make is our bar, our first bar. So we're going to go up to New, and we're going to create a shape layer. Instead of drawing this shape layer out, we're going to be creating this bar with expression language. All right, so we have this shape layer here. We're going to click the arrow, go down to contents. Actually, there's no contents in it right now, so we're going to add a path. And we want that path to be filled in, so we're going to go to Add Fill. All right, so in order to make our rectangle, we're going to go hit the drop down of the path. We see our little stopwatch. Once again, I'm going to hold down Alt and click the stopwatch. Okay. There's some stuff in there right now. I'm just going to hit Delete to get rid of that. Now, if we go to this little arrow, it gives you a bunch of expression language functions. We're going to go to Path Property, Create Path Points. And if we just click outside of this area, we'll see that we have a rectangle. And I'm going to hit V just to get out of the pen tool. Okay. So we have a rectangle. We can move it around. I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. But what's happening here is the way this function works is we define the points we want. I don't need to worry about this part too much. This is just how curvy, if you want it to be curvy, which we don't. And then if it's going to be a close, which in this case it is. So what we care about here are these 4 points. What it's doing is it's going from the coordinate 0, 0 right here to 100, 0, 100, 100, and 0, 100, and then back because it's closed. So we can edit these, and we can make this what we want it to be. So to do that, we want to add some variables. And so we're going to create one more thing. We're going to go to New, and we're going to select Null Object. A null object isn't really anything visually. It's basically just a bucket for data. And we're going to be using that bucket to add some variables. So let's think about what we want to be able to customize about our bar chart. One thing is going to be probably the width. Another thing, of course, we want to be able to adjust the height based on the data. So let's make that happen. So we're going to select our null layer here. In fact, I'm going to hit Enter. That allows you to rename things. I'm going to name this Control. This will be our control layer. So a control layer, I'm going to go to Effect up here, Effect, Expression Controls, and Slider Control. And once again, this just creates a slider. It does absolutely nothing because we haven't made it do anything yet. All right. Another way you can do this is you can go to the Effects and Presets tab over here, and you can search for Slider Control, and you can drag that over. So we're going to want 2 sliders. One of them I'm going to name Width. I'm going to hit Enter, and I'm going to say Width. And the other one I'm going to call Height. Now, the height one, this is just a stand-in slider. Of course, later on, it's going to be determined by our data. But with that in mind, we're going to go back to our shape layer here, drop down, and we have our points again. Now, what we want is to kind of trace out what our bar is going to look like. So we're going to start at 0, 0 again. And then going around, we want to go, instead of 100, 0, we want it to be width. I'm just going to call this W, width, 0. Then you want this to be width and height. I'm going to call that H. Then it's going to be 0 and height. So it's kind of tracing around. Of course, we have to define our variables. I maybe should have done this first. So again, in JavaScript, you could say variable H equals, and it has to equal something. So I'm going to go back up to this control layer. I want to be able to access it when I select any of these other layers. So I'm going to hit this lock button right here. This just locks it in place, so I always have access to it. I'm going to click back to shape layer, click back to what I want variable H to equal. And this is called a pick whip right here. You can select what you want it to be. So I'm going to select the slider for height. Okay, and then just a little quirk. In JavaScript, it's probably good form to use this notation variable H. You don't actually need that variable, though. You can just say H equals. I'm just going to be using that throughout because I think it is simpler. All right, then you can go up and I can say W equals, and that's going to be the width slider. All right, semicolon. All right, so now that that is all settled, we see there's nothing right now, but if we adjust the height, you can see it goes. It doesn't go up, though, it goes down. And we can also adjust the width. And the reason it goes down is just a little quirk of the coordinate system of After Effects. The way it works is the x-coordinate goes from left to right, like you'd expect, but the y-coordinate actually goes from top to bottom, because this corner up here is 0, 0, and then this corner down here would be 0, 10, 80, if that makes sense. So we're going to go back, and instead of having positive h, we're going to add negative h and negative h. All right, and there we go. And so the whole goal now we have to do is we have to adjust this height to be based off of our data. All right? So with that in mind, with everything set up in After Effects, we're going to take a slight detour and talk about how to organize our data into something that After Effects can use and actually understand. So with that, we're going to head over to Excel, and we're going to talk about the data we have. So the data I have here is just the amount of each of these items that has been borrowed from 2014 to 2017 from the DMC. If you're curious, we keep records of every item we lend out. I would just organize this into this neat little chart. So given this chart, After Effects can't just use an Excel file. It has to use something called a JSON file. So to do that, we have our data here. I'm going to go to File, and we're just going to save this as you can't even save it as a JSON. So we're going to save it as a CSV file. Yeah, that's fine. Great, so we have this as a CSV file. You can see it right here. To convert this to a JSON, we're actually just going to use a website called, we can just search CSV to JSON. This will get you far for many things. And we have this website here, csvjson.com. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just select my file here, dmcdata.csv, and drag it in. And if I hit convert, you'll see it in this file format. This isn't organized the way we want it to, so the first thing we're going to hit is transpose. I'm going to hit hash and transpose. And what that does is it organizes the tripod camcorder projector laptop underneath a year, and this will be useful later. The only recommendation I have for your own data is you're almost always going to want to use this hash function, and then depending on for the columns or rows you want to organize it under, you can change this transpose. So for this, we're going to hit transpose hash, and this is a nice looking organized file we can use. I'm going to hit download. That will allow us to save it. I am just going to save this. You can save this to your desktop. I'm going to save it to my special lesson folder here. And we can name it bar chart data. Doesn't really matter. Hit save. All right, so let's actually open up this JSON file. I'm just going to open it with Notepad. And there is our data. And this is what After Effects is going to be looking at. All right, so with that little detour of how to organize your data, we're going to go back into After Effects, go over to the project, and this is all our footage that we would import. So we're going to just drag and drop this JSON file into our footage. And there it is. Okay, so let's talk about how to get access to it. So a nice trick to use in general with using expression language is to use a text file to kind of understand, or sorry, a text layer to understand what's going on. So we're going to go to select this, hit new, I'm going to hit text. I'm going to hit the drop down here, drop down again for text, and then I'm going to hit Alt, click on source text. So I'm just going to demonstrate how this would work. So we're going to assign a variable. It's going to be the quantities of the various items we lent out. So I'm going to name this quant. And that's going to equal, we're going to use this pickwhip again, pickwhip the JSON file. And now we need to organize this, and we use this function dot source data. And that will organize this into an array that After Effects can understand. Semicolon. So the way to access the information is we're going to use the quant, and then we're going to use a bracket, and that's going to be the year. So the bracket is going to be this top layer. We want 2014, 15, 16, or 17. Let's say we want 2014. And then which item do we want? We're going to use dot tripod. All right, and if we look, it says 644, and that matches 644. We can even change this number. If I make this 844 and hit save, Control S, that will update the number right here. So the cool thing about this After Effects function, I'm going to change that back, is that it is completely real-time updates with the data as the data changes. And of course, we can update any value. If we want the value in 2015, we could just hit it 2015, and it changes. If we want it with camcorders, we could simply write camcorder, and it changes. All right, so now that we understand how to use the data, we can get rid of this text layer and start implementing it on this graph. Before we do that, though, we're going to actually make our axes for our bar graph. So for that, we're going to go up to the tools here, hit the pen tool right here. I'm going to click somewhere up here. I'm going to hold down the shift just to make this line straight. It's going to be straight. I'm going to keep holding down shift and click over here. And that looks like a pretty nice axis. Again, it's filled in. So I'm going to click the fill key right here and go to none, no fill. That way it's just a stroke. And a stroke of about 10 will do just fine. So this is our axis. What we want to tell the program now is kind of where to start and where the end is, because we're going to be mapping our data onto this custom y-axis, essentially. All right? So what we need to tell the program is 2 points, the start y value and the maximum y value. So we can go back into our controller. Before we do that, actually, let's make sure we organize our stuff and name this axis. So I'm going to hit Enter and name these axes. And we're actually going to drag this down just above our white solid. But yeah, let's go back to our control layer. Our null object is our bucket. If we go up to Effects right here, we can now go to the top Effect, Expression Controls, Point Control. Once again, we can also do this here. We can just type in Point Control and drag that in. So we're going to name this one Start, let's say, and this one Max. And you'll see these points right here. This is what that point is. So this is our max point. I'm going to put that, say, at the maximum I want it to be, and the start point at the start. All right, with that set up, I can make this better. Okay, with that set up, we can go back into our shape layer, hit the drop-down key, and we're back here. So we can kind of define those variables right here. So I'm going to say start equals pick whip. I actually don't want the entire point. I just want this y coordinate. That's the only important part. So I'm just going to select the y coordinate, semicolon, and then max. So for the maximum point, we don't really care about what this point is so much as we care about the distance between the maximum point and the start point. So I'm just going to, so we actually want the maximum point minus the start point. But because, again, the After Effects coordinates are backwards, it's actually going to be start minus, and I'm going to pick whip the maximum, the y coordinate of max here. All right, so we have everything set up for what we want. We have this height slider. We're going to graduate from that height slider and hit delete because we don't need it anymore. I'm just going to say, actually, for right now, height equals 100. There's one more step we have to do here. We have to actually make this start at the start. So just to make things simple, I'm going to make the position of control 0. I'm going to zero everything out. A common error you'll see is when making this is if things aren't zeroed out, as we say, then things can get complicated and really messed up. So we can drop down. If you just actually hit the P button, that'll take you straight to position, and you can set both these values to 0. Of course, we don't want it to look like that always. So we're going to, another quick shortcut if you want to, if you double tap E, you get back to the expression you were at. So instead of starting at 0, 0, we want it to start at 0 start. This is our start Y value. Get rid of that. And then we want it to go to start minus height, start minus height. Oh, looks like something's not working. Anyway, you have, and then we can change, the x coordinate of this by moving it down. All right. So once again, our coordinates got messed up when we moved the null object to 0, 0. So we're going to, you can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. This is our start. I'm going to drag it down, and you'll see the bar follows it now. And then you can go to max. Where did it go? There it is, this point right here, and drag it. I can actually zoom in. And if you push down the scroll wheel, you can drag around with the hand there. I'm just going to put this at the maximum value. Okay, and I want to go back to our standard view, so I'm going to hit this key and go to fit. All right, so that's all set up now. What we can do is we can, again, double tap E to get back here. All right, so what we want to do is we have a way to access our data. We just want to map that data onto our graph. If you know C coding language, this would be the map function. In expression language JavaScript, there's a similar function, which is going to be the linear function. I'm just going to show you here what the way that works. So it's going to be linear. You want your value. You want the input value. Sorry, the input min, input max, and then you're going to go to the output, well, output min and output, wow, there we go, output max. This is the way the linear function works. So the height is going to be linear, open parentheses. What's the value we want to work with? Well, we want to work with our data. Come to think of it, we never actually imported our data, so let me just do that really quickly. Let's see if we remember how to do this. It's going to be quant equals, we're going to go back to our footage here, pick whip the footage dot source data. So I forgot to do that. So we have our data imported in this quantity variable. So we want to go to quant, once again, the year is 2014, and we want this to be the tripod bar. So this is our variable. What's the minimum value? The minimum value is 0. And the max, this is just something it's kind of arbitrary. You determine what is a reasonable maximum value. If we look at our data here, you'll see that the highest value is 1021. So a reasonable max value would be 1100, let's say, just round up to the nearest 100. So it's going to be from 0 to 1100. And then, so that's the input space. The output space is, once again, the minimum is going to be 0, and the maximum is going to be that max value we determined. Close parentheses, semicolon. And there it is. Let me actually just fix, you see it's kind of at the bottom of the axis there. If we go to our control layer, we can adjust the start point and just make that more perfect. Great, and I'm going to go to fit. Great, so we have one bar chart. And that looks good. We could copy and paste this for the other variables. All we have to do is just change this from tripod to whatever else we want. Of course, we don't want a stationary chart, though. We want to have it animate, and we want to animate it from 2014 to 2015. So the way we're going to do that, I'm going to show you a few ways to do it. We're going to end up at a really elegant solution. Let me just talk about a way to get there. So you can animate using the linear function as well. Let me just show you what that means. We're just going to make a variable a, and we're going to cut and paste that over there. And actually just going to copy all of that, paste it, and call this b. So we have two values. One is the value of tripods in 2014, and we're going to make this the value of tripods in 2015. So if we want to animate between those, instead of linear, we're going to use a function called ease, which is exactly the same as linear, except it makes nice looking animations, because the value we'll be dealing with is time. So ease, as time goes from, let's say, 0 seconds, comma, 1 second, we want it to go from A to B, semicolon. And that works great. And it goes up and down. The only problem is we'd have to do this 2 more times for B and C. So let me just show you. You don't need to follow along here. If you are, I'd go to C and change this to 2016. So the way to make it ease between 3 points is you'd have to actually nest the ease function. So go to ease time from 1 to 2, from B to C. Oh, I forgot a parentheses there. And this works. It's just not the most elegant. And if I ever wanted to change, let's say I wanted to change it to the camcorders, I'd have to go through and change these 3 words to camcorder. If I wanted to change the duration, God forbid, I'd have to go in and change each of these values to something else. And that's just a pain. So we're going to do a more elegant solution. So if you look at this, all we're doing is we're just incrementing by 1 and importing that into a variable. And this is something we can just program to do. To do that, we're going to use a for statement. So we're going to actually just delete all of that and get ready with for. So for the for statement, let me do this here. The way this argument works is you're going to define a variable I to equal something, semicolon. And then as long as I is, in this case, less than or equal to something, and then we're going to increment I each time. And then as long as, so you're going to basically continue doing this cycle until the variable I does not meet this condition, and then you move on. If you're not familiar with programming, that statement, that is just simply a simple explanation. So we're going to do for, we're going to set I equal, in this case, to our first year, which is 2014, semicolon. And we're going to say as long as I is less than or equal to our maximum year, which is 2017. And then we're going to increment I each time. Close parentheses. We're going to define our brackets there. Oops. All right, so what do we want it to do? So we want to make a new variable. I'm going to call this value array. And you'll see what this does. So value array, this is a little quirk within expression language. If you're going to define a new array of values, you have to actually tell it that it's an array beforehand. So I'm going to say value array equals open square bracket, close square bracket. This just tells After Effects that, hey, this is the bucket we're going to be placing values into. So for the ith value of the value array, we want that to equal. This is going to be our linear transformation. So it's going to be linear, comma, and this is just what we did before. So it's going to be quantity. But instead of having just the quantity of 2014, we want this to cover the quantity of all the years. So that's just going to be quantity I. And then it goes from 0, comma, 1100. And then from 0 to max. Just like that. So what this does is it essentially organizes all the data just for tripods into one single array. And then for animating it, it makes it a little bit easier, but we still run into this problem in that if we ever want to change how long we want this animation to take, we'd have to change each of these values. So instead of having A, we could just say value array 2014 and change that for all the values. That's not what we want to do. We're going to do a more elegant, more complex solution. So let's do that. For this more complex solution, what is going to be really nice is we're going to talk about we're going to define how long we want each segment to be, how long it takes to go from year to year in our animation. So we're going to do a new variable. So we're going to hit our control once again. And this is going to be a slider. So I'm just going to come over to here, type in slider control, and drag that over. I'm going to hit enter to rename it. I'm going to name this segment duration. All right, so let's get that in as a variable. I'm just going to go to the top here. I'm going to name this segdir, and that's going to equal kind of pick whip that value right there. I'm just going to set this equal to 1 right now because it's to make the segment duration 1 second. So the problem, once again, is nested ease functions, which you want to kind of stay away from because that can get really tedious, especially if you have more data than just 4 years. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to define a variable x. And x is going to be you're going to trust me here, math.floor time divided by segment duration. So just to get a grasp of what's going on, it can be helpful. I'm just going to use Desmos graphing calculator. What the floor function does is it just creates a kind of counter. And if you divide, in this case, x here is time. If you divide this by a constant like 5, then you have this counter that basically would say every 5 seconds you increment by 1. And this is very helpful to avoid this the animation problem we have here. Let's go back to After Effects. All right. So we're going to make another ease function, and we're going to ease over time. But this time our start value is just going to be the segment duration times x, this counter. And then our second value is going to be the segment duration, segdur, times parentheses x plus 1. We're going to look to the future 1 increment. Going back to Desmos, all that means is we're going to start here and end at this point in time, and then we're going to start at this point in time, end at that point in time, and so on and so forth. All right, so that's our time, our input space. For output, what the values we want to go from, the value we want to go from, the value we want to go to, we're going to say, just going to say start value. We're going to make this variable. And the start value is going to equal, it's going to be in our value array we just made. It's going to be from the first year, which is 2014, plus x. All right. And then end value is going to be, again, in our value array, it's going to be 2014 plus x plus 1. So for the first year, x is just going to 0, so we're going to go from 2014 to 2014 plus 1, and so on and so forth. So if we finish this ease function, we're going to ease over time from the start time to the end time from our start value, comma, end value. And if we look, looks like I made a small mistake here. Mistake I made, I should have covered this before, is when we define our value array with our for statement, it's quantity I, we're talking about tripods. All right, what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that height equals whatever this is. Now we see this works wonderfully. Every 1 second, it transitions to the next year value. The only little thing is that once you finish it and you get to the last value, you get this expression error. That's just because it's trying to pull the value for 2018, and the value for 2018 isn't there. So it's going to add this quick if statement. If x is greater than or equal to, in this case, the difference between 2017 and 2014 is 3 years. So if x is greater than or equal to 3, we're just going to say that the start value equals our value array 2017, and our end value equals value array 2017 as well. So we're just going to freeze it at the last value, essentially. And now you see there's no more error, and it works wonderfully. And we are almost done. All we have to do is just copy and paste this, move these bars across, and then change the data that they're tied to. So this is shape layer 1. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to call this tripods. Now if we want to duplicate this, I'm going to hit Control D. I'm going to hit P now. Oh, actually, I'm just going to go down to the transform. And we can change just its x coordinate. We don't want to change its y coordinate. And move this to the side. We can repeat the process. Control D, transform, move it to the side. And one more time, Control D, transform, move it to the side. Now, if you want these to be evenly spaced, well, first, let's organize this. We can actually change the color in the timeline, which is kind of fun. So I'm going to make these all green, just to tell us green is our bars, or green are our bars. I want these to be evenly spaced. So if we go to the window align function, if we just align these horizontally, they're evenly spaced. It's very nice. And all we have to do is we have to go into each one and just change what we're talking about. So let's say this is the camcorder. If I double tap E, I can come in here. All we have to change is this from tripod to camcorder. All right, and then let's say this is our laptop. Double tap E. Change this from tripod. Ooh. Laptop. And then this is, what's the last one? Projector, that's it. Double tap E and change this from tripod to projector. And that's great. Of course, these are all the same color. That's very boring. We're just kind of getting into the visual aspect of After Effects now. I'm just going to make these, you should make these better, more themed colors. I'm just going to make them something else. If you select it and select the color, there we are. And the great thing is, again, you can customize this as much as you want to. So you can change the width of each bar. You can change their spacing with the align function. If you want to change your axes, you just need to move this point up and down. And that will change the minimum and maximum value, and hit Control-Z. The last thing we have to do is just kind of add all the other aspects of a bar chart. So one thing is going to be, we want Y lines going across. So I'm going to use this pen tool up here again. I'm going to set our start point, hold down Shift, set our end point. And let's make the stroke be something not quite white, but just kind of a light gray. I'm going to move this to the very bottom. I'm going to call this Y tick. So we want this evenly spaced. Once again, our maximum value is going to be 1100. I'm just going to move this. I'm going to use the arrow key. I can hold Shift and the arrow key to move this down quicker to the bottom. I'm just going to use a kind of shortcut to do this. We could evenly space it out manually, but again, that would take too long. So I'm going to go to Contents, hit this Add, and Add Repeater. So this is going to kind of duplicate it. Again, we want 4 copies. Actually, we want 5 because it includes itself. So change that number to 5. Go to Transform. We want this to go horizontally, so we're going to say 0. And then if we look at that. It goes just like that. And that way, we only have one layer. It's not too much to deal with. And that was pretty easy. All right, next thing we have to do is we have to just define what each of those means. For sake of time, I'm just going to do the first and the last. So I'm going to hit the text tool, go right here. If we open up, we hit this button here to open up the panels. We can select the font we want. We can select the paragraph styles. I'm just going to align this to the right. I'm going to hit 0. Deselect it, hit V to select the text. Oop. I'm going to want to zoom in here. Put this right here. And then I can select the text tool again. It's right aligned. This is 1100. Select V and align it correctly. And of course, you have to label what each of these bars mean. Next, I'm going to cover the last expression-driven animation is the title, because we want the title to change with each year. So I'm just going to hit this text tool again, and I'm going to say this title is Items Borrowed In. And I want this to be center aligned, so I'm going to come over to the paragraph tools to center align it. I'm going to select the text here. Let's just make this like 65-point font. In After Effects, the size of the font doesn't really matter that much because, again, if I hit V, I could always just resize it right here. But regardless, I'll do that. I'll bring this more to center. And then we want our year. So I'm going to hit the text tool. I'm just going to click. I'm not going to type anything. Once again, we're going to have this be driven by expressions. So we go down to the text, Alt-click. We have our text here. Now this is going to be, again, driven by this segment duration. So we're essentially going to copy what we just did with our animation, where let's just say segdir equals this, pick whip that, semicolon. We'll set our variable x, once again, equal to math.floor time divided by segdir. Right there. So now again, we have our counter. We just want this text layer to show the year 2014 plus whatever x is. And look at that. That will change now within each layer. It's a little strange, though, that it changes at the very end. I kind of want it to change in the middle. So instead of the math.floor function, I'll do the math.round function. And that way it will change in the middle. If you run that visually, in Desmos here, if you use the round, it just kind of shifts it more to the middle. And yeah, so all you really have to do now is just format this in the way you want. Maybe I want this to be bold text. You can change the font, you can add images. Where you go from here is really just dependent on how much you know about After Effects and how much you can do with it. But the tools you learned here are mainly about the tools of using for loops to define your value array, animating using this method, can be used for any other data visualization within After Effects. And of course, for all of this, it is always linked back to the data, and you could always change any of these values, and it would update in real time. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to cover all the other labeling. That's just kind of busy work. Again, you'd name these, you'd name each of these bars what you want them to be. But when you're ready to export it, it's just, again, just a kind of odd thing. You have to make sure this footage is in the layers stack here. Otherwise, it won't actually work. That's just based on the rendering pipeline of After Effects. It needs to call back to this data. So make sure you pull your data in, or else you get confused because nothing's happening when you try to export it. And to actually export it, you'd select your composition, go to File, Export, and you'd probably use the Adobe Media queue to export the footage just like anything else in After Effects. Yeah, and then if you'd like to export this as an animated GIF, there are online tools to do that. And I've done, for example, a presentation on political science in which I was able to show using animated bar charts, different election results and polling results, and import that into a PowerPoint presentation using an animated GIF. Again, there's a lot of depth you could use and a lot of different possibilities. You really do control every aspect of your chart using data-driven animations in After Effects. I hope this was a good introduction into how to use it through the example of a bar chart. And hopefully you have the tools to go forward and continue learning After Effects and continue making better professional-looking charts. All right, thank you.